in a business school, we often focus on this. I mean, we talk supply chains,
Yeah.
supply chains, and everybody institutionalizes the other. They institutionalize multinationals. We institutionalize nation states. But consumers are an institution, and they have a pathology. And if we're really going to be innovative, perhaps it's one of these questions that we have to pose is, what is the pathology, or what is a consumption chain? Not a supply chain, but a demand chain, a consumption chain. And how is it that the pathology and the behavior of consumers leads to either buy activity or inactivity, like Sarah is saying? One of my favorite quotes from Hannah Arendt and from The Banality of Evil is, never attribute to supreme malice what is accounted for by lethargy or apathy. And it's totally true. I mean, this is one of these fundamental moments where maybe this is a great moment for just thinking in the academy about consumption chains, pathologies of the way that people are held into account. In our next workshop, we're going to be working on how one constructs a corporate social responsibility report. And that's going to be, and you're all invited to that one as well. We have...
Actually, next one was, planned one was identity politics.
Oh, identity politics. But the one after that is going to be how to construct a corporate social responsibility report. Maybe we should also think about how we construct in a public space, how we construct, whether it be formal and informal, consumption responsibility reports.
Because what good is it for us to sit here? Aren't we just as guilty when we say those multinationals?
Yes.
What's my responsibility in all this?
There's a great video called "The Ad and the Ego," which discusses the ad, the AD, the ad, and the ego, which talks about this notion of consumption and behavior, and is very graphically demonstrated this pathology of how consumerism is driving so much of these problems that we're talking about. And how psychology is used to confuse people about the issues, about their own identities and stuff. So it's a great film to watch, to look at the ad, and the ego.
Do we have it here?
I don't know if we have it here, but I have a VHS copy that I'm going to try to. I know. I've had it for a long time, and I should try to find a DVD copy of it, but I can lend it to you folks also too, or burn a copy. That's not a problem.
Okay. We have 4 minutes left. Yeah. So are there any final comments or any? Yes.
I just wanted to say, I think we've been focusing, on the consumption. We've been focusing on the super governmental, the transnational organizations, and I think all of that, it just seems so abstract to me. And maybe I'm naive to say this, but I really just think I think that the best solution might be, setting up, looking at the specific situations and finding development techniques and finding ways to appropriately mine these minerals, creating situations within the country where you start to increase development, and from that, hopefully, you would hope that democracy will follow, those kind of better institutions will follow from within the country. It goes into Sarah's comment about, it starts at the individual, but I just have a hard time seeing, even if we do reduce our consumption here, are we going to reduce China's demand for the same, technological? And so I just don't necessarily think that adding these kind of, the decreasing demand and increasing awareness and increasing laws at the supra-transnational level is really going to make an impact to the people who are making money through this process. I think we need to find ways to do that in a healthy way, and a developmentally and progressive way.
So to close on that, I'd just like to say that you are absolutely right. That you should see the diamond projections for the next 10 years for India and China. What the De Beers and Rio Tinto mining corporations are the projections that they're forecasting for those regions as their economies begin to develop. And one of the areas, De Beers specifically, where they've had great success, in my opinion, is in creating shared value in the value stream, specifically helping to build the microeconomies in the areas where they are doing mining with the small businesses, that whether it's a local grocery store, trying to help those little areas. And I think that, going back to what you said, is yes, you have to start at the ground level in the country, in the region, and figure out ways to build those economies so that there is structure.
But I also want to add, as a countervailing point to that, is institutions don't mean just these big things. Institutions can be ideas. So even abstract ideas are institutional. I mean, anthropologically, people didn't start mining the same way. Somebody used a stick, somebody used a cup, somebody used their hands, and eventually people standardized their behavior in the way that they started to extract things from the earth. And everything gets standardized that way. All behavior tends towards institutionalization, whether it be as abstract or as hands-on as we can conceive it. So for the purposes of this discussion, it's important for us to note and acknowledge that even ideas themselves and even the most abstract concepts, they do change the world. They do change. Even people's behavior changing influences business activity. You know, there's some evidence to show that actually changes it quite dramatically. When people start moving away from a particular product, people start losing interest in performing or producing because if it starts hitting their bottom line, they'll move away as well. So, but I totally acknowledge that. But even from the mining industry, even in the local circumstances, the development circumstances, there are standards, there are benchmarks, and all of those are institutionalized forms of behavior.
And I think that's really the key when we talk about working upstream. You start looking at policies that become institutionalized.
Yeah.
And so I would advise also to looking at Goffman's work on institutional behavior in institutions and how these ideas, these concepts become embedded in our culture and our decision making. So again, working across disciplines and boundaries is really an excellent thing to do because as you remember, and I think we really do have to kind of start with the U.S. because we're 5% of the world's population. We use up 25% of the world's resources. And there's so much waste, there's just tremendous waste in many ways, but we have to reconfigure those discussions, and our decision making in terms of how we look at developing nations in terms of SAPs also too, looking at those structural assistance programs and how we need to change and restructure those. One of the things that I'm really trying to push in my work is this notion of having conversations about global health diplomacy and global and health security. When I worked with UNICEF and WHO many years ago, I realized that you cannot have a strong economy without having healthy people. And I think so if we start framing these conversations around health issues and all these other things, maybe it brings people back into this fold where we can talk about economics and trade and sustainability and development in a meaningful way. If we're going to compete in the 21st century, we have to have a healthy nation, which means we have to put more resources into our education as well as in our health strategy. Health is more than just pills and medicine. It's economics, it's transportation, it's labor, it's housing, it's all of that.
Well, and maybe it's captured in the new, it used to be the health of a country was looked at the GDP, and now the UN has come up with a metric called HDI, Human Development Index. And that, there's 7 elements of the human development, but to show that a nation is doing well. It's access to education, access to nutrition, economic development. So that is a metric that you should possibly be involved in if you're trying to measure things. What's the HDI? Of the local area, or is it doomed, or?
And that fits in with the Beijing consensus that GDP should not be the sole indicator of development.
Yeah.
The Human Development Index. So you folks will come up with an Albuquerque consensus.
The green chili consensus.
Why not? Why not?
Are there any other comments?
I'd like to thank you all so much for being here today. It was really an honor to have everybody come, and I look forward to hopefully having you all in the future as well. So.
Great,
It's our pleasure. Thank you. I've enjoyed myself immensely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm same as Evan. I'm really grateful everybody came. All your ideas. This really gave us a new restructuring in a way, but it's a positive one to analyze new elements we hadn't really considered.
Great.
And and for the next workshop, we definitely want you to come back and give us even more ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Montoya, for your help and moderating this talk.
I'll keep recording this. Oh, that's lovely.
Give him a standing ovation.